Greetings. This is Adina from Immigrant Finance. I have a really important episode to share with you all today. I'm going to be speaking about 3 reasons why you shouldn't let the immigration system limit your potential. This has been a topic coming up a lot recently for students that I work with in our program in Immigrant Finance School. I've um, been connecting with several individuals who have been starting to see their power and be able to visualize the potential that they have in their lives to have the lives they want and to be financially empowered and to create businesses and create change and make an impact. But something that has been coming up for several people, which is completely understandable, are these fears relating to the immigration system. What might happen to me if I do this? Do I really want to put myself out there, put myself more on the radar, be speaking publicly about things I care about? And I'm just how do I describe it? It kills me to it kills my heart really to hear this from people, and I understand 100% why folks may feel that way. Um, and I can only imagine the the fears and the struggles and the risks and consequences that one has to deal with as an immigrant. If you're not a citizen, if you don't have certain status here in the US. But it kills me because this immigration system that is so unjust and so inhumane and so just evil is taking away people's humanity. We all know that. We all know the immigration system does that. But to see it play out in individual people's um, thoughts as they consider and realize their potential just really makes it so crystal clear how awful this system is, because as humans, we are fundamentally meant to grow and evolve and help others and make a difference. We all have a purpose. And this is really why the immigration system needs to change, because if it's blocking people from feeling like they can do that, we have so much wasted potential in this country. We all know immigrants are some of the most innovative, entrepreneurial, people, and who have always created change and innovation in this country. And we're missing out on so much of that. And we're missing out on so many people becoming who they're meant to become and having the lives they deserve and making the impact they're meant to make because of this. So I wanted to talk more about it. And um, I have a lot to say on this topic. I just want to acknowledge at the forefront of this talk that I am not an immigrant myself. So there is a lot I could never begin to understand, and I won't pretend to understand what it is like personally to have to weigh the pros and cons and risks of doing um, anything that could potentially jeopardize your ability to stay in this country with your family, right? Or your ability to feel safe. So I will never pretend I know what it's like to go through that. So what I'm going to be speaking about comes more from my personal experience seeing my husband, Mao, who is an immigrant, go through this and what it did to his psyche and psychology, the injustices of the immigration system and how he was treated by it, as well as how he was treated in work situations because of uncertain immigration status, and how that did directly affect me because I obviously, as his partner, was affected by that in terms of seeing him go through it and feeling the pain myself, but also the practical effects of those situations on us as a family, whether it was financially being held back, or whatever. I'm also going to be speaking about this from my experience as an immigration lawyer. I've represented hundreds of immigrants over the years, and I, have seen a lot of people go through awful things. And I've seen a lot of people be destroyed by the system. I've also seen people who have, despite, being in the worst possible case scenario, been able to hold on to their humanity and not let anyone take that away. And I'm also going to be speaking about this as a financial and business coach for immigrants in more recent years, and my perspective of seeing a lot of people I've worked with in that capacity who have started to visualize their potential and step into it and take action despite the fears, and also to feel the fears that come up, and what could happen to them in the immigration system if they were to become more empowered. Whether the fears are real or not, they are there, right? And yeah, there's just a lot to say on this topic. I also want to just underscore and highlight that regardless of the immigration system and how it's made you feel or your family members feel, we are all human. No one can take that away, regardless of what any law says, regardless of how you or someone you love is labeled by the system, regardless of the opportunities that have been stolen from you or loved ones. There's a fundamental core of being human and having a purpose that none of that can touch or take away from you. There's just obviously more barriers and risks to think through. And in terms of thinking about those risks, I want to also acknowledge that it's really scary to think about, something that could potentially happen to you or your family if you were to step more into your power. And everybody is going to have a different calculus for weighing those risks. Some people are more risk averse. um, some people are more willing to take risks. You have to do what's comfortable for you. Part of this too is being able to tease out what is actually a risk and what is a fear, right? So when we talk about like becoming financially empowered or starting a business as an immigrant, there are no laws saying that immigrants can't be financially empowered or start businesses. There's no laws saying that immigrants can't have the best bank accounts and credit cards and become investors. There's no laws saying that immigrants can't start a business, right? Even if they don't have status, even if they're undocumented. So I want to point out from my immigration law background that the immigration law system is completely separate from things like the tax system and laws around starting businesses. Like they are completely separate areas of the law and the systems. And so that's why you see millions and millions of undocumented immigrants who are business owners, even if they don't have a work permit, right? So the limitations for immigrants when it comes to being financially empowered more fall on how you're not able to be an employee for someone else if you don't have a work permit, if you don't have status. But that doesn't mean you can't have a business, right? And do your own thing. So it's also helpful to just kind of separate that out, because sometimes we can have like stories come up in our head and fears that the system has put into our subconscious, if especially if you've spent your whole life trying to avoid having an immigration problem and not have and not do anything that could risk your family. That really affects you subconsciously, in terms of being seeing everything could potentially be a risk, even if some things actually wouldn't be, right? So I think the fear that maybe is more practical that has come up for some people I've worked with is like, okay, what if I become really successful and I start a business, and then that makes me become more on the radar of immigration authorities, right? Um, so for that, obviously talk to an immigration lawyer on an individual level to get actual legal advice personally on that. I can't be giving legal advice individually on a podcast, right? That's not my role here in immigrant finance. Um, but, right, think about how again, the immigration system is different. And there are lots and lots of successful business owners who don't have status, um, who don't have consequences from that immigration system. The consequences that happen in the immigration system happen because of immigration laws. So things like getting criminal convictions that would put someone on the radar of the immigration authorities. That's actually the number one way that immigrants have an immigration problem, is through the criminal legal system, because that's the easiest way basically for immigration authorities to come into contact with people through that system. So it's more like things like that that put people on the radar, and can cause a problem, not being successful financially and having a business, right? And if anything, if someone were to have an immigration problem and have to go to immigration court for another reason, because they had a criminal conviction, or because they had some contact with immigration authorities in a raid or something like that, and and the person's in immigration court, it's actually really helpful to be able to show that you have financial stability, that you have started a business, things like this, because most forms of defenses in immigration court are discretionary, which means that um, the judge basically, after considering whether the person qualifies for the defense legally, then it's up to the immigration judge's discretion whether they want to give someone that defense of deportation and let them stay in the country. And so what that looks like is people in immigration court are often submitting lots of evidence to show their equity. So all of the good things in their life, all the ways they've contributed to society. And so someone who is able to show that they have started a business and they're helping people and they're contributing in their community. Maybe they've even hired Americans as employees and are creating jobs. Like, that is extremely compelling. So in some ways, arguably, it's actually really helpful to take these steps to becoming financially empowered as an immigrant. And the other reason too is by having more financial stability, someone is going to be far more likely to be able to afford a lawyer in immigration court if they are in that situation. We know studies have shown that immigrants who have a lawyer in immigration court can be 6 to 10 times more likely to win their case just by being able to have a lawyer. And unlike the criminal system, there is no public defender in immigration court. So people only have lawyers representing them if they can afford one, basically a private attorney, or if they're lucky enough to get a nonprofit to represent them, which is extremely rare because of low resources in the nonprofit space. Anyway, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to just kind of lay out there what actually are some of the risks and how they tie more from like the criminal system and violations of immigration law, not because someone is successful and starts a business. There's no laws saying that that makes someone have an immigration problem. If someone is doing a criminal offense in that context that's like related to fraud, or um, an issue with taxes and fraud, like that would then come in as an immigration problem under the criminal system. But just having a business successfully would not be a reason, in my opinion. But I'm getting a little too much into immigration law here. I just wanted to lay out, kind of the background for that. And what I wanted to talk further about is why you really shouldn't let the immigration system affect your potential and limit your potential, for 3 reasons. So the first one is that the immigration law itself is wrong. It is unjust. It's racist. It's immoral. It's dehumanizing. It's broken. Um, it has destroyed people's lives and families. And we can't let a system that, excuse my language, is fucked up define who we are and ruin our lives. It is we owe more to ourselves and our families and our communities. And just because there is this system that is broken, that is putting labels on people and calling people illegal, and terms like alien, and using these dehumanizing terms and separating families, we can't let that system have that power over us. And there's nothing more sacred than your own purpose and potential as a human. And we can't let some system that is so terrible take that away from us, right? And so I think it's helpful to think about how, even though we take this system as real as what the law is right now, it doesn't mean that it should be that way or always was that way. It's all made up. So to the example I like to share is when my great grandparents immigrated here as refugees, fleeing for their lives, and they came here through Ellis Island when there was a mass migration happening from Eastern Europe and other parts of the world. They, under today's system, would not have been let in. They would have been detained for a very long time, likely, and they would have been undocumented, and they would have been told that they were illegal. That just didn't happen to my family because we just didn't happen to have laws at that time that did that. The immigration laws are pretty recent historically. And in the early 1900s, right, we didn't have laws calling people illegal. We didn't have laws taking away people's power like that. It was, they just didn't exist yet. So if there's been a time so recently when they didn't exist and people could come to this country and pursue their dreams and opportunities and try to have a better life, right? Like that is the foundation of this country. And I hope we get back to a place someday where that is more possible again for immigrants. It is not the case right now, right? There's a lot of barriers and injustices in the immigration system that make that impossible for us, right? But psychologically, what I'm talking about, subconsciously, what I'm talking about is not letting those injustices define who you are, because they're all made up. We didn't even have them several decades ago. And so why would you psychologically, right, allow this system to have power over you when it's just made up in the first place, right? And it's wrong and it's unjust. It doesn't deserve to have that power over you. So that's the first reason. The second reason why you shouldn't let the immigration system limit your potential is that no law or system can take your humanity away. At the end of the day, you are a human being. You are sacred. You, whether you believe in God or the universe or source, the angels, however you want to call it, you were put here for a reason. You have a purpose. You have people whose lives you've impacted and made a difference on already, and who you have the potential to help even more in the future if you step into your power and potential. And no system that's fucked up can take that away from you. And I want to give two examples of what that can look like. So in my role as an immigration lawyer, I work at a nonprofit where I represent immigrants who are essentially in the worst case scenario in the immigration system. They are detained and being deported. And I often work with people who have been detained by ICE for several years, and I fight to get them out of detention. I bring lawsuits to get them out. And I have seen people in that situation go through so much, and been by their side as they fight through this horrific, unjust system. And what I've seen is, more often than not, I've been surprised that many of my clients I've worked with in that role um, get to a place at some point often where they are able to find really the truth of what's going on, and embrace their humanity and embrace that no one can take that away from them regardless of the situation they're in. And you hear this about people who are in the criminal system too, who are facing, life without parole and long periods of incarceration. Like, there's often this situation where people can start to see when they've had their humanity just ripped apart by these authorities and been treated like an animal and had all their rights taken away, that at the core of that, after all of that has been stripped away, there's still something that can't be taken away from them, that no one can take away from them, even if they have their liberty taken away and they um, are in jail and detention, and they are not able to be with their families, right? People, many of my clients have gotten to that core truth where they tell me, and they find at some point like some level of peace with that regardless of how fucked up all of this is, no one can take away their humanity. And so I want to share that because if you're listening, and hopefully that is not a situation that you're in or will ever be in, again, that's like a worst case scenario I was talking about. There is that core truth that no matter what the system does to you or says to you or says about you, there is this core humanity that it can't take away from you. So hold on to that and and tap into that and own that power that you have that no one else can take away from you. And that is your humanity, and that's where your power and your purpose and potential come from, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of the system, regardless of what's happened to you in the system. Even in the worst case scenario, that will always be there. The third reason why you shouldn't let the immigration system limit your potential is that you have a choice. You can make a decision to own that power regardless of what the system says to you or says about you, and to reach your potential. There's, of course, as we've been talking about, so many barriers immigrants face. I don't want to pretend that this is easy for many people, but because there is that core humanity that the system cannot take away from you, you have a choice to decide whether you are going to step in to that power and to take steps toward your potential and do what you need to do to own your power. Regardless of what that looks like, whether it's just a small step in a direction you want to be going, or making a decision to not stay quiet if you have something to share, if you have a message that can help people, right? And to find ways to become more financially empowered so that you have more options and choices. So, learning how to generate income on your own, starting a business, and creating a way to build generational wealth for your family. These are all things that immigrants can do regardless of their status, that they have the power to make a decision to step into their potential. And there's, again, of course, going to be challenges and barriers, and those are all things that immigrants should not have to deal with and are unfair and unjust. But they're barriers. They're not what's the word, like, they're not things that completely cut off all opportunities forever. Like, it just makes it harder. But there are ways around them, and there are lots and lots of immigrants who are undocumented or who have uncertain status or have temporary status, and who are not citizens, who have been able to navigate through these barriers and still step into their power and reach their potential and create businesses, move forward causes, create an impact. There's so many people that have done it and that I've seen do it and that I've worked with who've been able to do it despite all of these fears we're talking about, that there is a choice there that you can make to do that too, regardless of how the system has made you feel. Don't let the system cut off your potential and keep you stagnant, because as humans, we are meant to be constantly growing and evolving. And if we don't do that, we there's something that dies a little bit inside, right? We have to always be expanding. And the immigration system is something that blocks off people from doing that way too much, um, and makes people feel that they can't do things that they can do because of all of the fears that are very understandable that come from this very violent, dehumanizing system. But you do have a choice. You do have a choice in the matter of whether you're going to let all of those fears stop you from becoming who you need to become and making the impact that you're meant to make. So these are the three main things to remember about not letting the immigration system limit your potential. First is that to sum up, the system is unjust and dehumanizing and wrong, and we can't let it define us. We can't let it have power over us. The second is that there's no law or system that can take your humanity away. That will always be there. And third, that you do have a choice. You can make the decision to take steps toward reaching your potential, regardless of what you've been told, regardless of how the system's made you feel and the opportunities it's taken away from you. There's always a way. There's always a way. And I encourage you all to make a decision today to take a step forward in owning your power and working toward the potential that you have and who you're meant to be and help, despite the fears. Even the smallest step can start to build confidence and make it easier to keep doing that in the right direction. So, for example, I was talking with one of our clients the other day who has this really important message to help people with, um, that is based on her personal experience of some serious struggles that her and her family went through and that other people need help with that she can really serve. And she is afraid to have her name out there because of her immigration status. So we talked about, like, nothing says you have to post your full name on social media or on your website, right? Like, you can put just your first name and an initial for your last name. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Like, there's little things you can do to acknowledge the real valid fears that are out there, but still take steps forward, um, despite it. So making a modification like that of, okay, maybe the way I'm going to do this is not post my full name because I'm afraid of if that could bring attention to me, right? So just using an initial, things like that. So what can you do today, to take that baby step toward your dreams and goals in a way that's going to feel safe, and allow you to do that, because you're meant to do something big, and we can't let the immigration system stop you from doing that. Thank you so much.